Hey everybody, welcome. I'm Colette Baron-Reid and welcome to the Envision Lab video series. And I'm here today with one of my absolute favorite Envisionaries. His name is Dr. Joe Dispenza. He's a best-selling author, a neuroscientist, and a highly successful chiropractor. He's an internationally renowned speaker on the functions of the human brain and reprogramming your brain to create a joyful, healthy, and abundant life. He's on the front lines of the emerging frontier of thought and consciousness connecting with the brain, mind, body. And he combines leading-edge science in the fields of quantum physics, neuroscience, brain chemistry, biology, and genetics to show what is truly possible. And I get to say he's my friend. He's taught thousands to rewire their thinking to change their lives through scientifically proven principles, which is what I love because I know nothing about science and everything that I do needs something to back it up. And I got to say, every single thing that he's ever written or done is brilliant. So I'm going to give you the list of his books. He's garnered huge recognition. As a matter of fact, he's known as the brain change expert. His best-selling books are Evolve Your Brain, The Science of Changing Your Mind, and Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, How to Lose Your Mind and Create a New One. I first saw him, knew I'd know him, featured in the award-winning film What the Bleep Do We Know, which we all know now is science. And he's in a new film, which I'm dying to see, called People versus the State of Illusion. Welcome, Dr. Dispenza.
Hi, Colette. Happy to be with you.
Yeah, awesome. Listen, I actually, when I sent you the list of talking questions, obviously, you know, I wanted to sort of say, let's talk about these things. But then I found out, and I'd completely forgotten, that you're now writing this amazing book. You're in the middle of all this scientific research that you're excited about, and it's called You Are the Placebo. So you know what? Let's just launch out the conversation with talking about that.
Sure.
So,
Well, I never planned on doing any of this. I actually was living a pretty happy life, and I had a series of incidents that led me to the question, well, gosh, if people are changing their internal states by thought alone, what is the mechanism to allow that to happen? So when we started, when I wrote my first book, the most common question that we got is, great information, but how do you do it? We started teaching workshops, and because of the model of neuroplasticity, which means your brain physically changes from every new thing you learn, every new thought you have, every new choice you make, every new experience you embrace, every new behavior you demonstrate, every new feeling that you emotionally cultivate, there's physical changes as a result of a shift in consciousness. And the epigenetic model of reality says that we're not doomed by our genes, that one single gene can have at least 35,000 different variations. So genes make proteins, and so proteins are responsible for the structure and the function of your body and your life. So the expression of proteins is the expression of health. So we started teaching these workshops with the idea of changing the brain and the body, changing the mind as well as the body. And we put a scientific model of understanding together so that people could understand what they were doing. And when you put intention behind what you do, you get better results. So first couple of years, we didn't really see much changes in people's ability. And then all of a sudden, it was like the gates broke open and we started seeing people healing themselves from all different kind of physical, emotional, mental conditions in their life and objective tests to prove it.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you right there because I have a question with that. So do you think that, I'm assuming that you gave them something to do to help change, right? So in my understanding is that repetition and reinforcement over time is what's necessary to make the actual change. Is that partly why that it took a while for these things to actually happen, like kaboom, all of a sudden?
Well, I think it's that. I think there's an element, well, there's several variables. I think repetition is one. I probably said it better as I did it more. I think people's level of acceptance and belief changed because information is so readily available. So I think there's an accumulation of several things, but repetition is one of the keys, which we'll talk about in a minute, because the brain learns by two principles, what's called the law of association. You associate, if I said neurons look like a leafless oak tree in winter, your brain would create an image. And that's how you would associate what I just said, a neuron, with new information and with old information. So we build models of understanding by association. Repetition then reinforces the circuitry in your brain. And if you do that enough times, the law of association, the law of repetition, creates a neurological network. And a neural network is just gangs of neurons that have fired and wired together to form a community of neurosynaptic connections that are related to an idea, a thought, a concept, a memory, a skill, whatever. So neural networks become the automatic programs that we unconsciously use every day. So to develop a new neural network then means that you're going to install the hardware in your brain to use so that when you walk out into your life, you have the circuitry in place to be able to get your mind and body working together. So, yes.
Okay. I'm like, I feel like a student at school. It's teacher. Okay. So with that in mind also, would you say then that that the same thing works if you are assuming a worldview is based on the patterns and the processes that have now become part of the brain function, right? So in other words, you've created these neural networks or these pathways that have assumed a story or a narrative. That's, how I work with clients as training coaches how to use this is also about the narrative that I believe is kind of you be able to see that actually as these neurosynaptic relationships. Would you say that's true? Are they in there?
Okay, so I'm going to stop from what we were talking about. We'll talk about this. Okay. So your brain is your brain is wired to reflect everything you know in your past.
Right.
Every place where one neuron connects with another neuron is called a memory. So you have trillions of connections in your brain based on the people you know, the places you've lived, the things you've done, the experiences you have, the things you own, the pets you've lived with at different times in your life. So your brain is an artifact from the past. It's a record.
Right. It's
past
a record.
Experiences. So then you think about 60 to 70,000 thoughts in one day. Out of those 60 to 70,000 thoughts that you think in one day, 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts as the day before. So the same thoughts lead to the same choices. The same choices create the same behaviors. The same behaviors produce the same experiences. The same experiences cultivate the same emotions. And the same emotions then drive our same thoughts. And that's called an identity. That's our personality. So then most people's personalities are built on memories from the past. So if you're thinking the same thoughts, performing the same actions, and living by the same emotions, then you're viewing your life from the past.
Through the lens of the past.
Through the lens of the past.
Right.
Now, if feelings and emotions are the end product of past experiences, and you're living by the same feelings and emotions every single day, then two things are true. Number one, nothing new is happening in your life. And number two, those feelings, if they're driving the same thoughts, then you're thinking in the past. Right. So then we tend to edit out reality based on the circuitry in the brain. Now, thoughts are the language of the brain, and feelings are the language of the body. So then the way we think and feel creates a state of being. Then for the most part, we're viewing reality both neurologically and conditioned emotionally in the body through the past. Now, this becomes the challenge because when a person wants to create a new future or change something about their future, their state of being is literally in the past. Now, their body is their unconscious mind, and it does not know the difference between an experience in their life that creates an emotion and an emotion that we fabricate by thought alone. So the same familiar emotion, the body's believing it's living in the same past experience 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Now, this is really the process of change because then we have to literally free ourselves from the chains of the past, and that creates a little discomfort.
Okay, so I just want to ask you just to clarify something, because in my work, I talk about 3 layers of the brain. One is the conscious or the aware brain. There's a higher consciousness, which is pure awareness. Then you have the thinking mind. The subconscious is the programmed mind. And the unconscious, because my background is Jung, so is that access to the collective, to the race mind, to the dreaming mind that has a language of pictures, symbols, and images. So when you said the unconscious, you're talking about the part of us that is unaware or the part of us that is subconscious. I just want to make sure, just the clarification for language purposes.
So when I say your body is your unconscious mind, it means it's completely programmable.
Right, it's subconscious, okay.
Now the body is the unconscious mind. What I'm saying about that becomes conditioned subconsciously.
Ah, okay.
So it doesn't. If you train it emotionally to be angry every single day, it will become programmed to be angry. But it'll believe it's in angry experiences all the time because it has no consciousness until you program it.
Right.
But the unconscious that you're talking about is a very deep recess,
Right.
way beyond our level of awareness that is based on symbols and imagery.
Right.
So when you condition your body to be the mind, in other words, if you're thinking certain thoughts that create certain feelings, and those feelings then drive certain thoughts, and you keep this going, thinking and feeling in the cycle, you'll condition your body to be the mind of whatever you're thinking and feeling. Once the body becomes the mind, that's called a habit. Habit is when your body is your mind. Now, 95% of who we are is a set of memorized behaviors, emotional reactions, beliefs, and perceptions, and even attitudes that function like a subconscious computer program. So now 5% of the conscious mind is working against 95% of what we memorize subconsciously. So this is the process of change that requires then becoming conscious of your unconscious programs. That's the first step in change.
So with that in mind as well, so you've got this concept that you are on automatic pilot, basically. So 95% of you has an expectation, and we look for coherence in the outer world. So we are going to look through a particular lens that's going to dictate what we see, because the subconscious sorts out the information, because it's too much stimuli for any of us to just see everything that's possible. So when somebody comes, say for example, to a coach, or say to you and come to your workshop, say, I have these goals, I can't meet them because something in me keeps on repeating the opposite. So no matter what we decide, no matter what we plan, then until we actually do the work on that 95% and bring it to our awareness and see, okay, this is where I am, this is the state, we can't actually change it because we can't even name it, right? So is that correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Right.
So
yeah, go
most
ahead.
people wait for crisis, They wait for that moment where there's catastrophe or trauma or some loss or disease before they all of a sudden wake up, right? Because now you don't feel like yourself any longer. And the moment you no longer feel like your predictable self, that's the moment you begin to see yourself for the first time, because you're no longer being the old self. Right. So my message is, why wait? You can learn and change in a state of pain and suffering, or you can learn and change in a state of joy and inspiration. So when we begin to look at those states of mind that are now conditioned in the body subconsciously, most people expect the change and the transformation to happen instantaneously, but crossing the river of change from the old self to the new self is literally the neurological, biological, genetic, chemical death of the old self. And the moment a person doesn't feel like themselves any longer, they rush around and make the same choice that leads to the same behavior, that creates the same experience, that produces the same emotion, and then they say, this feels right. Well, no, it actually feels familiar. That place in the unknown is the perfect place to create from. And so when we understand that there's a new self that biologically can be reorganized, then when we cross that river and you can't predict your future, the best way to predict it is to create it in that place of the unknown.
Right. And so when somebody actually wants to, have a change or be more successful in one area of their life, for example, they have to be uncomfortable. I really believe that there's this, I always say you have to betray your past. You have to actually betray your story. You need to be able to look at that and say what is familiar is, like, basically, if you're going to do what you did, you're going to get what you got. So anything that's too familiar is something that's just going to give you more of the same. So being comfortable in that stage of between, it's that, like the river crossing, but still being able to have a different perspective on things while you go there. One of the things that I've found in working with students with the Envision process is that I'm able to get them into a state of relief very, very quickly, so that once they're all balled up, because it's the emotion in the body, we see the difference between contraction and expansion. And so right away when you feel expanded, well, we're pleasure-seeking creatures too. It's like, oh, that feels good. Let's have more of that. And then you can get to that space of neutrality and a neutral observer, the witness self, where you could say, okay, now I can look at this without it being too treacherous or fearful or etc. The author Catherine Ponder, she's this Unity Church minister that wrote these books in the 60s, where she talked about, in her book, The Dynamic Laws of Prayer, she talked about something called chemicalization, which is what happens to people before when they have an epiphany, and then there has to be an action that happens afterwards. They realize they can't be who they were. Everyone is afraid of the death of the ego self, because the ego's desperate to stay alive and stay because it needs to have an identity to exist. So then at that point, just before that demonstration, she calls it, or the manifestation of the new you do everything you can to go back to where you were because you're so uncomfortable with the unknowable.
Well,
So,
let's reason
yeah,
that. Let's reason
yeah.
this, because this is fundamentally important to describe the process of change. Because when you wake up in the morning and you remember yourself as yourself, there's a feeling that you look for. And the moment you get in touch with that feeling will drive a set of thoughts that will lead to a set of automatic programs, or your body goes on autopilot, and you function pretty much from that state. When you begin to become conscious of all of those elements that are deriving the old self, the thoughts, the behaviors, the emotions, and you're no longer firing and wiring the same circuits in your brain that produce the same neuropeptides that signal the same hormones that create the same feelings, your brain then says nerve cells that no longer fire together no longer wire together. There's a weakening of the connections that are connected to the old self, and as those neurons begin to weaken and prune apart, the memory of the old self is literally changing. If you're not signaling the body emotionally with the same chemistry, that the body's been addicted to that emotion. Now the body is craving its emotional needs just like an addict because it's modified its receptor sites for more suffering, for more guilt, for more hostility, for more unworthiness, whatever it is. So then as the body goes into transition, you've just stepped into the river of change. So most people, they white knuckle it in this process because they're looking for something to reaffirm their identity as the old self. So the challenge then is when you're in that void of the unknown. If you woke up every morning and you said to yourself, okay, I'm going through crossing the river of change here, and you have some clear understandings of what you're doing, then you may want to say to yourself, well, before I open my eyes today or before I start my day, how would greatness live today? What is a future that I want to embrace? What would it emotionally feel like? Can I teach my body emotionally what it feels like to be honorable, to be passionate, to be in love with life, to be in a state of gratitude, and allow those emotions then to cause a level of auto-suggestibility to thoughts that are equal to that emotion that begin to fire and wire new circuits in your brain that begin to cause you to plan your behaviors. And as you begin to rehearse and practice in your mind who you're going to be when you open your eyes, you begin to fire and wire new circuits in your brain and begin to emotionally signal your body in new ways. And now you're in a new state of being, because when mind and body are working together, that's a new state of being. So most people don't believe in that future because they haven't experienced yet. But that's because they're relying on their senses to determine reality. The quantum model of reality is beyond the senses. It's an immaterial understanding that transcends the body, transcends the conditions in your environment, and transcends time. Now, we have all the biological and neurological machinery to make this happen. But when most people are going through the process of change, they're white-knuckling it, waiting for relief. But my message is, if you can unfire and unwire and uncondition your body, then why not refire and rewire so that now as you begin to every day remind yourself of who you no longer want to be, and then remind yourself of who you do want to be, there will be biological changes in your brain and body, so they're no longer living in the past, they're now living in the future. Now that's when the uncommon and the synchronicities and the wonderful things begin to organize in your life equal to a new state of being. Because if you're emotionally embracing an event before it's made manifest and you're in a state of gratitude, you're giving your body a taste of that future event in the present moment. Now, your body, as the unconscious mind, is literally living in that future in the present moment, and you're signaling new genes in new ways, and you're literally making your brain look like the experience has already happened. That's called knowingness. That's called certainty. That's called a state of being.
Wow. Okay. This is so great. I can't thank you enough. This is such a great conversation. I'm like, I want to talk to him all the time, every day. So we then, I know your new book is called You Are the Placebo. So let's talk about how we actually then can, I believe that we can, if we can create whether or not, like for example, the envision process creates a new state of being by entering into a relationship to pictures and images that relate to nature. So this eco-consciousness that we all have will immediately deliver these images because we are nature. So we see ourselves moving through these landscapes, etc. And those they are reflections of new states of being that we want to reinforce over and over again without saying, I want to feel such and such. We actually put ourselves in an environment of feeling this thing that we, instead of saying, I see myself as successful, say, well, what does that feel like to you? What does that come up for, what comes up for you when you say those words? What would a landscape look like of success? Where would you live in it? How would you feel on a day-to-day basis? And you rehearse it, basically. So in a way, you rehearse the future, you rehearse the outcome, and then eventually the rest of you catches up. Does that how this works, what you're talking about?
Okay.
I know it's a lot.
So you got three questions in there. Let's see how I can answer. So turns out that when we started seeing very significant changes in people's health by thought alone, then I started seeing people getting miraculous and spontaneous remissions of conditions and diseases right in our workshops. That's when we started bringing in our scientific team of neuroscientists and quantum physicists to measure, to see what was going on in their brains and body in real time, and let's see if we're changing the field of the room, et cetera, which started me to think about this concept of the placebo, because placebos are created because a person's belief in something outside of them, some person, some thing, some place, could be a sacred place, and they begin to expect an outcome. And as they begin to anticipate and expect an outcome, what they're doing from a quantum model of reality is they're selecting a future potential, and they're emotionally embracing that future. And as they begin to emotionally embrace that future, they begin a cascade of pharmacological changes that begin to happen in their brain and body that begin to signal new genes so that their body begins to respond because of their belief in that element. So now, we have seen people in placebo studies heal themselves of Parkinson's disease with a saline injection, have 200 times the amount of dopamine created in their belief in some injection that's inert. A sham surgery where a person has an arthritic knee that has significant amount of pain and loss of range of motion, who just has an incision on their leg without having the surgery, 6 years later still walking around with no pain in their knee and full range of motion. Or people that have been diagnosed and have 6 months to live die to the day of that prognosis, but when they do the autopsy on their body, they have no cancer. It was a misdiagnosis, so they died by thought alone. So the person who moves in a state of religious ecstasy and can drink strychnine and have no biological effects, or the person who chews on glass or gets bit by poisonous snake and has no physiological change because of an energetic state of being, it starts to beg the question. When a person takes a sugar pill or a saline injection or goes to a place or has a procedure done and that procedure is a placebo, are they just feeling well? Is it just in their mind? Or is it in their mind and is it in their brain? And are there physical and epigenetic changes that take place as a result of it? And the answer is absolutely yes. So they've changed their state of being by thought alone, which begs the question, do you need the sugar pill or the saline injection or the procedure, or could you just move into a state of being by putting your attention and your investment in a possibility that exists in the quantum field, emotionally embracing it, and then allowing yourself to make something that's unknown known? So the answer to that question is absolutely yes, because when we did our scientific studies at our advanced workshops in 2013 this year, we saw people heal themselves of Parkinson's disease by thought alone, traumatic brain injuries, cancers, by just changing their state of being without anything outside of them. So the placebo works like this. If I give you a pill and it makes your headache go away, then I give you a pill and it makes your headache go away, and you watch the television that says aspirins that look this color and look this shape, makes your headaches go away, and you see a sports figure drink whatever it is that makes his headache go away, sooner or later you're going to associate taking that pill, just like Pavlov's dog, with some physiological change within you. So when you take the pill and it makes the headache go away, you notice some change in your internal state. The moment you feel differently inside of you, you begin to pay attention to whatever it was outside of you that created it.
Right.
That association, that associative memory, that conditioning is a memory.
Right.
So then we begin to anticipate that change every time we see a pill. So then if you substitute an aspirin for a pill that looks like an aspirin, and you're told by meaning, because meaning has a significant role in the placebo, and it means something to you, then in anticipation of that result, because you're putting your meaning behind it, you have intention behind it, you are conditioned to understand that there's some physiological change, and you expect the outcome, then those are the ingredients that begin to produce physiological changes by thought alone. So it's conditioning, it's expectation, and it's meaning. So then can you take away the sugar pill and the saline injection and teach a person how to condition their mind and body, expect a future potential and emotionally embrace it, and assign meaning and intention so that they understand what they're doing. And you can produce the same exact changes without anything outside of you. In other words, you're changing your internal state that's producing an internal change in your body without anything outside of you.
And then you begin to expect the coherence in the outer world as well. Because if you have an expectation, because you're not even aware you're having an expectation or an anticipation, because you're looking yet again, through the lens now of seeing this as a new reality, you're now going to look for evidence of that in the outer world as well. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Now, there's a caveat to this, because when I started investigating all the double-blind, triple-blind placebo studies, I mean, it's just an amazing thing when you see how powerful the mind is. Those people that got the saline injections for Parkinson's disease, that had intention tremors or pill rolling or problems walking, fascination gait or steppage gait, they had problems involuntarily controlling their body. When they got the saline injection and told it was a very powerful new drug for Parkinson's, their dopamine levels rose about 200%. Their brain started making dopamine. They couldn't make their dopamine by themselves. In other words, if I said to you, double your dopamine levels today, right now.
You couldn't do it.
You couldn't do it.
No.
But if you associate something from a past memory to a future reality, if you had a fear of public speaking, and I said to you, you have to speak publicly tomorrow, the moment you begin to think about that future reality based on a past memory, your body would physiologically move out of balance, and you probably would have a little bit of dryness of mouth, a little heart racing, a little sweating, and you produce the same physiological changes in your autonomic nervous system, not by consciously doing it, but by association.
Right. So it's automatic.
It's automatic. Now, autonomic nervous system is the automatic nervous system. So 2 points. How do we get into the operating system? And the idea of meditation is the way that we do it. Because when you begin to create internal changes in your brain, and you begin to make your inner world more real than your outer world, your brain begins to dissociate from all the conditions in its external environment. It begins to forget about the feelings of the body, and it literally loses track of time and space. That's the moment that the ego is no longer running the show. You become nobody, no one, nowhere, no thing, no time. You become pure consciousness. That's the moment consciousness, being the epiphenomenon of your biology, begins to change the brain and body so that it automatically or autonomically does what it naturally does. So it's not our job in the placebo to try to change our dopamine levels. Our job is to move into a new state of being. Being able to do that every single day, back to your question about repetition, requires a little bit of conditioning, because you're going to walk back into your life and you're going to see your coworker and you're going to look at your car and you don't like it, and you're going to feel the pain in your back, and you're going to see that you're overweight, or whatever it is people do to reaffirm their identity through their senses. So the people that had the dopamine levels go up significantly in the Parkinson's study, the key was that when they had that change, the change only lasted for a period of time. Mm-hmm. Why? Because they walked back into their life, they saw their wife, they went to play chess with their friends, they saw their caregiver, they slept in the same bed, and it was their environment that reminded them of who they were. That's how powerful the environment is. So to then retreat from our life every day and eliminate our senses, close our eyes, play music or plug our ears, put our body away, what we're really saying is we don't want to use the environment to remind us of who we are. We don't want to be a body. We don't want to identify with our body. And we want to forget about time long enough to remind ourselves by thought alone of who we're going to be. Now, that is the conditioning process of the placebo. And it turns out the people that had changes in Parkinson's disease in our workshops, where their intention tremors went away, they didn't put their faith in a sugar pill or a saline injection. They put their belief in themselves and into a field of possibilities or traumatic brain injuries or whatever. And that same model works because the body literally gets conditioned as if it was being given something outside of them.
Yes. So let me bring in the idea of placebo versus, or not versus, but let's see if this makes sense then. So when I teach Envision, what we do is we work off the premise that we live in the environment of our thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. So the unconscious, because we have something called eco-consciousness, knows if we want to have a conversation with it, since it doesn't speak English, Chinese, or German, that it will deliver a conversation with us if we require it to, which is what active imagination is, to show us our thoughts, feelings, and beliefs in environmental terms. So that's how my process works. You start to see yourself as looking at a landscape or a place you inhabit. So this is a picture. It's based on mindfulness, on the technique of meditation, where you are literally always in that state of pure consciousness and awareness, where you are just looking without any judgment or criticism. So, what I have found was that the more you do this, the more quickly you can get out of a state of mind that is concurrent with a past behavior, a past thought process, etc. And you say right away, where am I? And the next thing you know, you say, oh, I'm here. Do I want to be here? No, I want to go somewhere else. So you actually restore choice. Would you call that a placebo, that you become that placebo because you are looking at the environment of your own thoughts, feelings, and beliefs from the position of the aware mind?
I think you can create a placebo response.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So you get that placebo response.
Right. Because the moment, the privilege of being a human being is that we can make thought more real than anything else. That's the privilege because of the size of the forebrain. That's the architect, that's the designer, that's the CEO, that's the symphony leader. So the fact that we can make thought more real than anything else, and in that moment you're in that environment and all of your attention and intention is consumed in that inner world, then that conditioning process, if there's an emotional quotient to it. Now the emotional quotient is important because that's when you notice a change in your physiology. So you go from neurotransmitters in your brain to neuropeptides in your limbic brain to signaling hormones and thousands of different chemical reactions in your body. If you're able to create a shift in your emotional state as a result of the picture that you're seeing in your mind, now you're beginning the conditioning process.
Right.
So a lot of people get lost in this because it's not an intellectual phenomenon.
No, it's not. It's an experiential phenomenon.
And the end product of an experience is called a feeling or an emotion. So if you can make the thought the experience in your mind, and you can put intention behind that, well, now you're going to begin to see the effects in your biology. Right. So you begin to create the placebo response. Now, let's go back to the idea of meaning. Because meaning is an essential element in your interpretation of what's taking place. So if you're embracing your life from the same level of mind every single day, then you as the quantum observer are assigning meaning to the same reality and putting your intention behind it. And of course, because of free will in the quantum model, it basically says that you're reaffirming your life to be exactly the same. If you take a group of maids, they did this experiment where they took a a select group of maids that were very physically active, and they followed them around for a period of time, and I think it was in Texas, and they found out that these maids had worked so hard every day that they exceeded the Surgeon General's requirement for exercise. So they divided them into two different categories, and they said, okay, you keep doing what you're doing and working. And they took the other group and they said, when you exercise, you guys are actually exceeding the requirement for the Surgeon General. So you're burning more calories than you're eating, and you should be losing weight, and your lean body mass should go down, and your waist size should shrink, and your heart rate should change. These are all the benefits of exercise. Now, the maids for the next month did exactly what they always did. But the maids that understood what they were doing, and they had meaning and intention and knowledge behind what they were doing, of course, lost weight, of course, had less body fat, had lower heart rate, because once you assign intention and meaning or purpose behind what you're doing, you produce a greater result.
Right.
So the interpretation then of every single day, looking for the jewel in what we're doing and then assigning meaning behind it and keeping our intention on that future, allows us then to produce greater results. That's another element of the placebo.
That's fascinating. I love that. I want to ask you a question about something called the reticular activating system and its role in all of this. Is this the sorting part of the brain? Is this correct?
Well, the reticular activating system, let's talk about it on two levels, okay? So the RAS, or reticular activating system, is really responsible for information that's coming from the higher centers to the body and from the body back to the brain. So it's an editing system. And so if you're sleeping on a Sunday afternoon and you all of a sudden you hear the cat clanging around on the counter and you just baked the blueberry pie, your reticular activating system would pick up something in your environment and you would come to your awareness, okay? Right. So from a survival standpoint in antiquity, it's important because that's how we select information for predators and possible threats in our environment. There's just a junction box in the center of the brain called the thalamus, and it's just a big Penn station where the neurons from the body pass up to this junction point, and then they branch out to the higher centers of the neocortex. So information is traveling up and down the reticular activating system, and it's a network at the brainstem where information is sorted out, is the best way to say it. So the reticular activating system, from a subconscious standpoint, is filtering data.
Right.
To allow certain information to go from your body to your brain and your brain to your body. And it functions primarily in unison with the cerebellum, which really, if you look, the cerebellum is very, very tightly wrapped around the brainstem. And so cerebellum subconsciously is editing what comes in and what comes out. So if you woke up one morning and you said, I don't want to be alive today. I want to kill myself. I don't want to live in death. If your thoughts were that powerful, you'd be dead. But the reticular activating system says, you don't really mean that.
Right.
But if you keep saying this over and over again, and you're persistent, I'm going to start letting that information pass to your body, and you're going to start signaling some really unhealthy genes, and you're going to start a program that's going to run automatically, and you're going to get sick. So the reticular activating system then, sooner or later, by our persistence, opens up to information. That's what repetition does.
Right.
So now, when you start experiencing higher levels of consciousness, and you start freeing the body from the chains of the past, because the body's literally living in the past. When the body starts eliminating emotions or freeing up emotions, we move from particle to wave. We move from contraction to expansion. We start elevating our energy. And that energy literally leaves certain parts of the body, and it travels up the spinal cord. And when it reaches the reticular activating system, there's a little switch in there called the thalamic gate. And once that information is traveling from the body and it opens that gate, all of us, we've seen this in our studies in our advancing workshops. Once that gate is opened, the body literally is driving all that energy to the brain, and we have pictures of students in our work whose brains are literally like someone took the dimmer switch in a room and turned it all the way up. Their brains are on fire, and that's not That's not anything else but the brain going into a heightened state of superconsciousness. And all of a sudden, that energy that's normally pressed down in the body is now being amplified in the brain. The moment it reaches the brain, it starts intercoursing with the pineal gland, and the pineal gland sprays out all these wonderful neurohormones to sedate the ego.
Right.
It all of a sudden activates the posterior pituitary, and you start spraying out all this oxytocin. Oxytocin makes its way into the amygdala and goes, let's shut off the circuits with fear. Let's shut off the circuits with aggression. Let's shut off the circuits with sadness and guilt. And you go from selfish to selfless, and all of a sudden you start trusting in the future. You start trusting in everybody. Your heart starts to open. I call that the natural state of being. Now, getting that particular activating system to open up after years of conditioning, after years of unworthiness, after years of fear, after years of whatever, is an act of will. It takes a constant act of volition to be able to make that transformation. That's the alchemist taking base metals and turning it into gold. We're taking primitive emotions and turning them into elevated emotions. And it requires, on our part, a certain amount of effort to do that. So the reticular activating system, in its primitive sense, has a lot to do with the editing process from brain to body and body to brain. But by the same means, it's also the switch that activates higher centers, and the brain goes into high gamma frequency, and that's the moment you'll never forget that experience ever, because it's etched in your three-dimensional architecture cerebrally.
I had a similar experience when I hit bottom as an alcoholic and an addict. You know, they always say that every alcoholic has to hit bottom. So I completely became a new person, literally overnight, in an instant of complete and absolute surrender when I thought I was just going to die. And a part of me did die. And then, of course, you know, I'm clean and sober now over 28 years. So, of course, this consistent repetition of behavior and thought process and belief systems, et cetera, you know, completely changed shame to respect, to, you know, lack of dignity to dignity, et cetera, just by that act of will, of course, you know, making it a day at a time choice and decision making. But what was very interesting, so of course that was me, and that's my own personal experience, but what I found was interesting when I was doing the case studies for the Envision process, and I was teaching intensives in Sedona, I actually saw people physiologically change. Like, we saw this one woman had come in who became taller. Her hair looked different. I mean, it was like went from gray to almost light brown. We were shocked. Like, people's entire physiology would change in a weekend in front of my eyes. Now, I didn't have a system at that point because I was still really playing around with what Envision could do with people and the steps I took to bring them into that state. So I'm not a scientist. I didn't have any way to measure it. But after the fact, you know, those people who continued to want to reinforce that state of being did change and others did not. But that was really interesting to me. And now that's one of the reasons why I decided to teach this to coaches as a way to get their clients out of their, you know, that kind of ancient thought process. They don't even realize why they're stuck, just to get them to a different vantage point to say, oh, wow, wait a second, I can feel like this just a minute now, you know, so that you can almost short circuit the old.
So it absolutely is. Turns out that even some of the best geneticists right now are saying that your genetic expression changes on a moment-to-moment basis if you're changing on a moment-to-moment basis. And if you're changing significantly on a nodal point of change.
Do you say a nodal point?
Nodal.
Nodal. So like an epiphany. An epiphany would be a nodal moment of change.
A striking moment.
Right.
You have that striking moment and you never forget that moment because it's so pivotal in your body and in your brain that you can upregulate certain genes or you can downregulate other genes. Now, remember, we said the expression of genes is the expression of proteins. The expression of proteins is the expression of health or the expression of life. So then stress hormones and primitive emotional states of anger and hostility and aggression and fear and anxiety and pain and suffering and hopelessness, powerlessness, you know, those emotional states that are connected to those primitive stress hormones tend to really shut down gene expression. So people who are living by that state for an extended period of time, they're pretty much their body's running on a genetic program because there's no new information coming in. But when we begin to change our internal states. And the insight or the realization has to be coupled with a strong emotional charge, an energetic
Right.
charge. I like to use the words energetic because the person who's drinking strychnine is not moving into an emotional state. They're changing their energy. And the decision, when we make a decision with such firm intention that the amplitude of that decision carries a level of energy that's greater than the hardwired programs in the brain and the emotional addiction in the body, and the body begins to respond to a new mind, that moment is an experience that we never forget. And that's the
Yep.
moment, literally, our past disappears because neurologically and biologically and chemically and genetically, you're literally restructured in a matter of seconds. So then, I talk about this in one of the chapters in You Are the Placebo. They took a group of men and brought them on a retreat in New York State, and they made them, through a process, live as if they were in their 20s again. And they created an environment completely.
I actually read a study about that. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's pretty amazing. Carry on, because it's a great story.
This is Ellen Langer's study. So what happened was, and they couldn't bring anything that reminded them of their present life. They had to live as if they were in their 20s, and they set up the environmental conditions for that, and they lived there for just a week or so. And at the end of the study, they measured their height, their weight, their range of motion, their finger lengths, and they found out that these men literally transformed their physical appearance.
Yeah.
So then by moving into a new state of being, your personality creates your personal reality. By moving into a new state of being and reminding themselves of who they really are or who they believe themselves to be, there were physical changes that took place. They did not have to say, I'm going to signal new genes to make my synovial fluid better in my fingers, or I'm going to decrease the amount of arthritic change in my knees. Or they didn't do any of that stuff. All they did was move into a new state of being. And once the emotion of the experience began to activate the limbic brain, now they're starting to turn on the autonomic systems. And in a matter of seconds, there's epigenetic changes that begin to take place. So when a person has those transformative moments, there should be biological effects as a result of it. Now, if you have more intention behind it, and just based on this conversation, you begin to realize, oh my God, who am I being every day? Am I being a stressed out, person that doesn't love life? Well, that is really what your biology now is really reflecting.
Right.
So a transformation that takes place in a matter of moments where a person really dies to the old and surrenders to it, and then has a new moment of possibility. And that possibility is coupled with an elevated emotion. They are no longer in their past, and their biology will literally reorganize itself to reflect the new mind.
Let me ask you a question about this, because sometimes people are so attached to their old story, because the narrative is the voice of that, right? The narrative is the voice of that you hear that tells the story of the experience, right? So people can see the possibility in that moment, but because they're so used to the old familiar. So again, I go back to this idea of repetition. So you never forget the moment of change, and I know you don't. You never ever do. I mean, any epiphany I've ever had, including when I had my motorcycle accident and I had to stay in bed for 6 weeks, and I literally could not get out of bed for 6 weeks. My husband had to take me to the bathroom, the whole 9 yards. And one would think being completely without movement, etc. But I was very aware that this was a blessed experience that was like an initiation. And I'm like, something in me has to die in order for this to change. I ended up losing weight. I ended up looking younger. I ended up being able to get back on my motorcycle. I ride better now. It was bizarre as to what has happened. So it's always exciting too. And then I knew that I had a choice to go back to the old thought process that actually put me in the position to have that accident, right? So what I notice coaching clients is that the hump or the hurdle that we all have to overcome is the psychology of the past that is still very inviting. Again, I just want to bring back that gap moment, where you have to cross that river. But once you're over there, you really can see sustainable success. I mean, you don't ever have to go back there once you know that you don't. I think that's also the thing, is people need to know.
That's called wisdom. A memory
Right.
with emotional charge is called wisdom. But the problem is that we kick and scream the whole way because we're so conditioned that the results have to be so immediate, and we have to be so comfortable, and change is so inconvenient,
And it's messy.
And you don't really like yourself in the process. But I mean,
I call it the great unmaking. It's true.
Well,
it's the making and unmaking and remaking and unmaking, right? It's like art. It's like a big finger painting project.
Well, I mean, that's what I was going to say. It's a creative process. And a creative process, I mean, I know just from writing a book, is the agony and the ecstasy. There are moments where you're in, and there are moments when you're out, and that's just the way it goes. And we all have to struggle before we have that shift in our brain. And there's been research to show that there's a moment where the right hemisphere finally takes over, and you all of a sudden have that moment of joy, and you're in love with your creation. But we have to go through this process, and the discomfort that we feel once we understand that is the death of the old self, that we can resurrect the new self with a new state of being. Then if you're consistently reminding yourself of all your problems and all your conditions and all the things that could go wrong, and analyzing, you're actually, in our research, we saw that when we analyze our life within the emotion that we've memorized, we actually make the brain more unhealthy.
Yeah, so we anchor it.
Yeah. So if we use the ego to try to change the ego, or we use the brain to try to change the brain, or use the program to try to change the program, we saw what happened in people's brains. That they actually got more out of balance. So that's why crisis works so well, because the brain just basically surrenders. It just gives up, right? So
be nice to do it without the crisis, though, right? That's the whole point.
So think about this. That's exactly my message. Why wait for the crisis? So then we accept suggestions in our brain. The thoughts that we accept that are happening behind the scenes of our awareness are only equal to the emotional states that we're living in. So we're more suggestible to emotions that are thoughts that are equal to the emotions that we're living by. So then if you're a pessimist and you're unhappy and you're negative, the thoughts that you're going to entertain, you're going to accept as true, are going to be equal to the emotional state. So now all of a sudden, that's changing, and your body, which has been conditioned, is craving those emotional states. But if you would have to agree then, if you could change your emotional state every single day, and those emotions then would drive new thoughts, you should auto-suggest or be more suggestible to new thoughts based on those new emotions. And that's really what we talk about in the book. So then by cultivating new emotional states and allowing how you feel to drive a new set of thoughts and being suggestible to those new thoughts means you're taking care of your past.
Right.
You're taking care of the old. And you're not just a victim like, when is this going to end? This is the point I'm trying to make. Most people in the midst of change, they're going, oh, when is this going to end? This discomfort, when is it going to be over? When is it going to be over? And they try to preoccupy themselves with everything in their external environment. They will wind up making the same choices sooner or later. But if you knew the inner environment could become as real as the outer environment, truly, and you were able to, instead of being a victim, all of a sudden be a creator and saying, okay, look, I'm going to give my body a taste of my future. I'm going to give my brain and body a taste. And if I put my conscious mind on this result, then my subconscious mind should bring me there, and I'll have the willingness to practice this every day, to remind myself of who I no longer want to be, remind myself of who I do want to be, and I'll be the experimenter in my life. Let's see if I get some feedback in my world as a result of it. And if I don't, then there's some emotion that I'm holding on to, or something I'm unconscious to, that I have to bring under the microscope and say, is this part of my future? I mean, if
do we want it to be? Exactly.
Right. If I want to, look, here's the model. If I'm going to be wealthy and abundant, I can't feel lack. If I'm feeling lack, then I can't create a future. I mean, gold only creates gold. Lead doesn't create gold. So people all of a sudden throw their everything out with the bathwater, and they say, it didn't work for me. Well, no, you didn't work for you.
Right, for it.
Or it. But the it is you.
That's right.
So if you're trying to create a new future, but you're not addressing the emotions that keep you anchored to the past, and those emotions have been conditioned in your body, the moment you return back into your life, you literally, like Pavlov's dog, will begin to physiologically, automatically return back to the old self, because you're using the people and conditions in your life to reaffirm that emotional addiction so you can remember who you are as a somebody. That's the process of change.
Well, this has been the most phenomenal conversation. Obviously, we are in alignment 100%. One of the reasons I called my new business the Envision Lab is because it's all about exploring the self and new ways to find success strategies so that you can evolve into the person that you want to be and not the one that you were. Anyway, I so appreciate you. As soon as your book is out, I want to come and re-interview you again on the book, and I can't thank you enough. I'm going to post a note where everybody can get your books, and I believe you are having a couple of workshops this fall. You're going to be in Germany. Where are you going to be
this weekend? I'll be in Norwalk, Connecticut, and I'll be in Manhattan on Thursday night doing a little thing in Midtown, and then we'll do a progressive workshop in Norwalk, Connecticut this weekend. Then I'll be in Hawaii at Quantum University.
And when is that?
End of October, end of September, beginning of October.
Great.
And then I wind up in Mexico and in Barcelona, in Germany.
Okay, I'll post a link to your website.
I don't know. I'll be around LA. I'll be in.
Okay, you'll be everywhere. Well, I'm hoping to see you in person sometime soon. Thanks so much. I so appreciate it. Thanks for visiting me here at the Envision Lab video series for my favorite Envisionaries, and you are absolutely one of my favorites.
Thank
you so much.